morning. So we're going to be reading Luke chapter 8, verses 40 through 56. I'm going to be reading out of the ESV, the English Standard Version. Now, when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was the ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him, and there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all of her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who is it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once. And he directed that something should be given to her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. You may be seated.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you all. If I haven't had a chance to meet you yet, my name's Andrew, and we're continuing in our study through the Gospel of Luke, and we have continued to see that Jesus is bringing good news for everyone. But this morning, where we step into is a moment of desperation. And moments of desperation can really bring out the best in us. They can also bring out the worst in us. Because when all hope seems lost, we lose our inhibitions. We can stop caring what others think because we just can't imagine things could get any worse, and we're just seeking a solution for our problem. And today we come to a moment where we see two people with two different needs, but in deep despair, trying to fix something that seems unattainable in their own strength. Now, in my own life, I've experienced despair on many different levels. After all, I'm a Bears fan. But like true despair, whenever I think of this, there's a couple of moments that really come to the forefront. The first was I had a really, really bad day surfing one day. My body was breaking down, and that I started to shake while I was out in the water. I was in waves that were far too big for my skill level, and I was trying to get back in. And as I was trying to get back in, all the strength in my body was just going nowhere. And it was a steep beach, and so I had to kind of get up and like run, but the water was too strong. The current was too strong for me. It kept ripping me right back down, and I was doing this cycle over and over again until I was just toast. And I'm watching my family on the beach, and I'm like, this is really it? Like, I'm just going to die in view of my family? And they're just running around. They have no idea. There's one guy who had an idea. He was watching me like this the whole time. And I was like, where were you, buddy? Like, when I finally, like, was at this moment where I'm like, I only have one option here, and I hope this works. I'm going to ditch my board, and I'm just going to throw myself into a wave, and hopefully it washes me up far enough on the shore that I can actually claw my way out of here. And it's exactly what happened. And I just collapsed on the beach. And that was a great moment. The second one was in the throes of my wife's battle with Lyme disease. And man, nothing seemed to be working. Everything with her body seemed to be getting worse. And as her body was shutting down, her daily pain was increasing. And with 3 young kids, I will admit now what I was much too proud to admit then, that I was so scared. I was just terrified every day of what I was going to wake up to or what I might not wake up to. And I was so scared of losing my wife. I was so scared of the possibility of trying to raise 3 kids without her, because let's be honest, she's the stronger of the 2 parents. And I was so desperate to take the pain away from her. And I couldn't do anything to alleviate that. And there's a lot of times where I was pleading with God, Lord, let's just flip this. Let me take this. Let her be okay. Let's do something different here. But what I learned in that season of desperation was that wholeness, even in my despair, was only to be found in giving my whole self to Jesus. Fears and all. Despair and all. And so this morning, as we see a man on the verge of losing his only daughter, we see a woman who's in deep need of healing. Both are driven to the feet of Jesus in despair. And as we watch all this unfold, as we walk through this passage that we've already read through, I want to encourage you to see where you find yourself in this story. Are you one of the people kind of on the fringe, an observer of the crowd, just paying attention to Jesus because you're curious? Are you a disciple of Jesus that's just like wherever he goes, I'm going? Or do you come here this morning because you are desperate? And you're in desperate need of Jesus. And so let's just begin by starting in verse 40. Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. Jesus is coming back after he had traveled across the Sea of Galilee. He'd gone into the Decapolis, the area of the Gerasenes, which was the Gentile area around the Sea of Galilee. And so Jesus is coming back. And as he's coming back from that, if you were with us last week, we got to hear the story of Jesus encountering a demon-possessed man. There's all sorts of floating bacon involved. And it's just an incredible story of transformation. And so by the time he comes back, people are waiting. They're waiting to see this rabbi that's gathering so much steam. And remember, Luke, the author of this account, the one who's putting this all in an orderly fashion for us to read through, what he's continually reminding us is that Jesus' popularity, Jesus' notoriety is only growing. And in this scene, we see that people are coming all over. His words, his actions, his life is no longer able to be hidden because too many people have been affected by this rabbi. Too many lives have been transformed. Too many people have found truth and healing in his words. And so you can't hide what is happening in Galilee. And so we read on in verse 41, and there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. Now, as Jesus returns, the crowds are awaiting him, so is this desperate scene. In verse 41, we see that Jairus, we're told that he's the ruler of the synagogue. What that means is that he would have been in charge of the local synagogue, who was going to do the reading that week, who was going to share the midrash and the teaching, who was going to lock up. He would have the keys. That was his domain that he was in charge of. And what posture do we find him taking in this moment? He comes to Jesus and he falls at the feet of Jesus. This is a pattern that we've seen emerge in people's encounters with Jesus, that they seem to always end up on their knees falling at the feet of Jesus. And here Jairus falls at the feet of Jesus and he's begging him, imploring him, will you come back to my house because my only daughter, around 12 years of age, she's dying. And there's no hope aside from you. There are very few things that a parent wouldn't do for a child. And in a moment where all hope seems lost, where does this devout Jewish man go? this ruler of the synagogue, where does he turn? He turns to this rabbi that's creating such a stir, such a controversial figure. But it's interesting how in this moment, in crisis, all barriers seem to be cast aside if you can get to a solution. And as Jesus so often does, he doesn't back away from the pain, the chaos, and the distress. He steps into it, and he goes with Jairus. Now, as Jesus went, the people pressed around him. Again, Luke is pointing us to this idea that the crowds were thickening. I mean, people are bumping into Jesus. That's how close they are to him. Wherever he's going, there's this mass of humanity that's just swirling around him, trying to see what this rabbi is going to do next. And so many people had so many different motives for why they were there. Some were just like, I heard he does miracles. I just want to see a magic trick. I would love to see him do something spectacular. Some were skeptical. I keep hearing about this guy, but he can't really be who he says he is. Some were all in. They're like, I've seen him. I trust him. I'm with him. He's the Messiah. He's the one we've been looking for. And what we encounter here with Jairus is a man who was just desperate for hope, desperate for healing, desperate for wholeness. And what's always amazing to me is you can stand in a crowd, you can sit in a room like this, and you really have no idea what the person next to you is walking through. Like some of you come in here and you're having your best day. Like today's a great day and you are so excited. And right next to you is somebody who's just barely hanging on. You don't know the weeks that have been brought into this space. The pain, the sorrow, the joy, the celebration surrounding us. And here what we see is Jesus has this crowd around him. And what's amazing to me too is we all learn this lifelong skill, right? Where we learn to pretend that we're okay even when we're not okay. And when we show up to church, we often put on this mask like, no, everything's fine. I mean, I was just imploding in the car 2 minutes ago, and my family was running a little bit behind, and they heard me yell at a tone that probably wasn't great. But we're here, and it's good. We're good. I'm good. Right? So with this crowd pressed in on him, what I love is Luke just cuts through it for us. And he begins to give us one viewpoint, one story of someone who's just trying to get to Jesus. Verse 43. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. So much is packed in so little. This woman had been suffering for 12 years. She'd spent all of her life savings on physicians trying to chase down the latest remedy. And how could she do this? And when essential oils didn't work, she went on to something else, right? Like she just was striving for what is going to work in this moment. Trying to find some cure. Trying to find a way to stop this blood that was flowing from her that had haunted her for over a decade. See, this issue, we hear it and we grieve for her and we go, man, that's significant. But what we forget is that living under the Torah and the law is that she was ceremonially unclean, which means she shouldn't be in a crowd. She shouldn't be in a place of worship. She shouldn't be gathering with anyone because if she was to touch someone, even accidentally, she would make them unclean. And so this woman most likely had been living in isolation, most likely unmarried, no kids, and always feeling like life was something that was lived by everyone else except for her. And she's feeling this well of desperation. She'd followed all the advice of her doctors, and that had left her nowhere. I love in Mark's gospel account, he describes this same woman, and he says in Mark 5:26, he said, this woman who had suffered much under many physicians and had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. Her condition only had gotten worse. So exhausted, tired, alone, desperate, she did the only thing she could think to do. Verse 44, she came up behind him. She comes up behind Jesus and she touched the fringe of his garment. And immediately her discharge of blood ceased. Reaching out, she took hold of the fringe of his garment, the corner, the tassel, the kanaf. In Numbers 15, 38 and 39, we hear this command given to the people of God. It says, "Speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner, and it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to whore after." All right, that last line is like full Old Testament like fire, right? Like we're all prone to wander. But what was the point of these tassels that they were given? To remind them of God's law, his covenant with them, that they would keep it as a protection before them and behind them. These tassels, called the tzitzits, they were to be worn as Israel's reminder of God's commands. In the talit, the prayer shawl, you see these tassels on the corners. A prayer shawl like this would often be taken, and there would be a blessing that would be said, and then you would place it over your head. Some go so far as to place it entirely over their head as a reminder of God's covering over your life, as a reminder of God's law over your life, God's authority over your life, that he is the King of kings over all things. And so you would place this as you begin your prayers, and some would wear this around their shoulders like this, and they would bring it around. And as you see, there's these longer tassels on each corner. Now, these tassels are tied in a particular way. There's 8 strands. There's 4 cords that are divided into 8 strands that hang down here, and then up here there's 5 different knots. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because the 8 strands, the 5 knots adds up to 13. The word tzitzit, which is just really fun to say, is a word that in Hebrew has a numerical value of 600. And so they see these tassels as a reminder of the 613 commands that God gives throughout the Torah that they would keep before them, in front, and they would keep behind them at all times, knowing that God is covering and protecting them, but also a reminder to live out this law, to follow in this way. And so any good Jewish man would be wearing these, and some would wear it in a shawl fashion. Some have actually, it's like an undershirt where the tassels hang out from below, and they would have this on at all times, again, as a reminder of God's commands, God's laws. And so as Jesus is walking along, his tassels would be exposed. And when this woman comes, she reaches and she grabs the fringe of his garment, the hem of his garment, the kanaf, the wings of his garment, taking hold of this and finding life. Now, what's fascinating to me is that we all were to wear this. Those who were good Jewish men and women would sometimes wear these as well, to remind ourselves that we were to live to God's standard. I love Jesus wearing this because he's the only one that actually fulfilled God's standard, that he lived perfectly all 613 commands. And so this reminder was a reminder of the full authority and weight that he wore as God's son sent for us to rescue and redeem in a way that no one else ever could. And so Jesus would have these tassels upon him. And we pause here for a second because what's happening is absolutely amazing. But if we pause just long enough, we actually see that what is happening here is truly stunning. Because in Malachi, the prophet Malachi, he said these words to God's people. In Malachi 4, he says, "For behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven, when all the arrogant and all the evildoers will be stubble. The day that is coming shall set them ablaze, says the Lord of hosts, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. But for you who fear my name, my Son of righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings, in its kanaf, and you shall go out leaping like calves from the stall." Healing in the wings, healing in the tassels. What's Jesus doing right now? He's once again fulfilling Scripture as this woman grabs hold of the only thing she can get a hold of on Jesus, as close as she can get, and immediately she is healed through the healing that comes in Jesus' wings. This desperate moment turns to a moment of healing. She grabs hold of the kanaf, the corner of his garment, and she's restored. The wholeness that she had longed for comes once again. But here what I love is the perceptiveness of Jesus. There is a crowd of people all around him, pressing in, touching him, reaching for him, bumping into him. And Jesus says, "Who is it that touched me?" This woman grabs him. "Who is it that touched me?" People pushing him from all sides. "Who is it that touched me?" Jesus was aware that something significant had transpired. That power had gone out from him. When all denied it, everyone kind of looked like, "Jesus, there's people around." Peter jumps in. "I'll give you an explanation." He's like, "Master, the crowd surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." See, again, Luke, he's very intentional with his words. He's reminded us, and he's been making it clear from the very beginning of this gospel account, that Jesus' life is marked by authority and marked by power. When his ministry began, he was filled with the Spirit, empowered by the Spirit, equipped by the Spirit, led out in the desert, and then his ministry explodes with power. And so here, Jesus is not unaware when there is power coming out from him. He knows that something has happened, but no one is stepping forward. No one is claiming it was me, because they're still kind of looking around in this weird daze. And just to keep in mind, as all of this is transpiring, where's Jesus going? He's going to Jairus' house, which means Jairus is in tow with him going, "My daughter is dying. We need to get there quick." And now Jesus is stopping the procession, and he's like, "Who touched me?" I can only imagine what Jairus was thinking in this moment. He's like, "Listen, there's a lot of people, but we need to keep going. We have a task at hand. Let's roll. My daughter is dying." And Jesus is like, "Power's gone out. Someone's touched me." And no one's saying anything until verse 47. "And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed." And suddenly, in the midst of this crowd, we're having church. There's a testimony. There's a witness. It's breaking out. Because she's experienced the transformation of Jesus healing in her life. And let's just look for a moment at how she approaches Jesus, because I think we all have something to learn from the way that she comes before Jesus. First, we see that she came trembling. There was an awe. There was a fear. She understood the authority and the power that Jesus had. There was an appropriate nervousness. I know we always talk about Jesus as the friend of sinners, which he is. He loves us. He pursues us. He pulls us in. But he's also the creator of all things. And we should at times be terrified of who he is, because he is the King of kings over all things. And so she comes trembling before him. And then we read again that she fell down. Again, we've seen this theme throughout this section, throughout chapter 8 in particular. When Jesus encountered the demon-possessed man, what did he do? He fell down at the feet of Jesus. When Jairus comes pleading to Jesus, what does he do? He falls down at the feet of Jesus. When this woman comes trembling before him, what does she do? She falls down at the feet of Jesus. You could even say that the wind and waves fell down at the feet of Jesus when he silenced them. We see this time and time again, that Jesus has power and authority. So what does she do? She comes trembling, she falls down, and before all the people, in the presence of everyone, she declares why she touched Jesus. Now, what's she expressing here? Well, she's telling her own story. She's expressing and proclaiming her faith in Jesus. Listen, I'm going to tell you what I did. I touched him, and here's why I touched him. Because I needed healing. And what's she expressing in that? That she was placing her faith in Jesus. That she believed that if she touched him, he could heal her. That he had the power to heal. And what was the result of her faith? Well, she's now proclaiming before everyone that she's been healed. That's the result of her faith. That her faith was rightly placed in Jesus. And what I love is that she doesn't even waste any time giving credit to where credit is due. When God moved in her life, she's immediately now witnessing and testifying to his goodness. Now, there's something there for us because I think too often, and I know this is going to sound weird, but I think too often we're selfish with what God is doing in our lives. Because we're afraid that it's going to sound like self-promotion or we're going to like point back to ourselves. But when God moves in your life and you're proclaiming what he is doing, that's not self-promotion. You're promoting God. Like, let me give you an example. This week, down at our South Campus, we had someone come in and just decided that they liked a lot of our stuff, so they just took it off the stage, right? And we discovered it about 24 hours later that we were missing a lot of our musical equipment down at South Campus. Super fun. Yeah, we were all really happy about it. And one of our prayers, as we were talking around it, and a few of us were talking around it, was just like, Lord, would you bring conviction to this person? Would you bring a conviction to them that they would just just come back? Well, I'm attesting to you, I think we got a partial conviction because this morning when Lucas went down there, he was greeted by a cart of some of the stuff that had been brought back. Which is so curious to me. And I'm sharing this because I'm like, okay, God, you're doing something here in this person's life. I cannot wait to see what the rest of the story holds. And I just am praying for fuller conviction on this person, that they would just come and confess and bring all things and be right with the Lord, and God could move and we could just testify. But even that was a simple answer to prayer where God was moving in a way that it would be selfish to be like, yeah, he doesn't move. No, he does. He does. And when you see it, let's proclaim it. Let's call it out. Let's witness to it. Let's share it with a friend. Let's share it with our families. Let's share it with each other. When we see God's goodness break through, don't hold on to that, but declare it. And so this is what she's doing. She's declaring. Now, what's wild in this whole situation is that this woman was ceremonially unclean. And by law, anyone she touched would be unclean. But what do we see happen time and time again with Jesus when unclean people touch him? It doesn't affect his purity. Instead, what we see is Jesus' purity, his goodness, his righteousness is transferred to the other person. So this woman who is unclean is now made clean because of Jesus. His goodness spreads. It cannot be overcome. And this woman has experienced it, and now she's bearing witness to what Jesus has done for her. And what was Jesus' reaction in this moment? As she's proclaiming all these things to him, did he lose his mind? Like, how dare you touch me? You're unclean. I can't even believe you're here. You're not following law. Well, get out of here. How dare you put everybody in this gathering at risk? Now, what does Jesus say? He said to her, verse 48, he leads with daughter. I mean, can you think of a more endearing term? He looks at her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. He doesn't reprimand her. He doesn't push her away. Instead, he says, your faith was rightly placed. Your hope in me is the right hope to have. So go in peace. And not just peace as we always think of it as like the absence of strife. No, but wholeness, completeness. Go in wholeness. What was broken has now been mended. What was ruptured has now been restored. If we just look at the last few weeks of passages alone, again, what do we see? That Jesus has power over nature. He has power over the demonic. And here he is showing his power over sickness. Jesus' kingdom is a kingdom of life. And there's still more. But before we continue, I want to pause here for just a second. Because I think it's important as we find ourselves in the scene that we imagine ourselves there for just a moment. That the crowds are pressed in on Jesus. So many people running into him, bumping into him. But who experienced healing? Who experienced healing? It's the one who sought him. Not who just accidentally bumped him, but the one who pursued him. Because here's what I know. Every one of us will bump into Jesus at some point in our lives. He's too significant not to. You can try and hide from him, but you're going to find him somewhere. You're going to have a friend that just wants to talk to you all about him. You're going to go to a hotel, open up one of the drawers and find a Bible waiting for you. You're going to watch the History Channel, and they're like, fascinating people in history. Let's talk about Jesus. You're going to find him some way, shape, or form. You're going to bump into him. But here's the thing. Just bumping into Jesus is so much different than seeking Jesus. See, it was no accident that this woman was where she was at. She was desperate and she needed healing. So in her desperation, did she linger back and hope that Jesus would find her? No, she ran to him, got as close as she could, reached out and grabbed hold, drawing near, trusting and hoping, placing her faith in the fact that he alone could heal her. And my prayer for each of us in this room is that you would not just hope to bump into Jesus now and again. Not just hope that maybe I'll have some time for him later in the week or later in the month or later in the year. Not just hope that, maybe one day my paths will really cross with him. Maybe one day I'll start praying and I'll start to understand this more. Maybe my friend, they seem really on fire. Maybe I can kind of pull their fire and it can become my fire. But my prayer would be that we would become a people that is desperate to be with him. Desperate to make time for him. Desperate to ensure that our paths cross with him. That we make space for him. That we reach for him. And not just once a week. But every week, every day, every moment. Because what we see in this moment is that faith in Jesus is rightly placed. Faith in Jesus brings a wholeness that nothing else can bring. Faith in Jesus is life. And like the air we breathe, we need him every moment of our lives. So let us be a people marked by our desperation for him. But this story isn't over. While he was still speaking, picking back up in verse 49, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." Now, Jairus has just witnessed all that has transpired, this incredible moment of healing. But his urgent desire was for his own daughter. And he's watching all of this unfold, probably with a mix of awe and grave impatience, like we don't have time. And now he's hearing the very words that he feared the most. Your daughter is dead. Leave the teacher. There's nothing more he can do. It's over. Now, if you've ever been in a hospital or you've ever been talking with a doctor and you've heard the phrase, there's nothing more we can do, you know the weight of those words because they hit you. We've exhausted all our options and now we're just going to see how this plays out, but it doesn't seem like it's going to go well. And Jairus is chasing down his last option, and now he's just heard that his daughter is dead. So everyone's like, hey, just leave Jesus alone. There's nothing more. But what I love in this story is that Jesus wouldn't leave it alone. Jesus, on hearing this, verse 50, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." Do not fear. His greatest fear has just played out, and Jesus is saying, hey, do not fear. He's speaking words of comfort and direction. Do not fear, only believe. What's Jesus trying to pull out of Jairus in this moment? He's saying, trust me, listen to me, follow my lead. Honestly, when I read through this passage, I can't imagine being in Jairus' shoes. Because to believe what Jesus is saying actually feels really dangerous to me. Because if you've ever had your heart broken or you've ever experienced grief, you don't want to relive that again. You don't want to get hope up just to get it dashed again. And I know some of you in this room, you've given up on hope because you feel like every time you start to feel like you're getting somewhere, you get pushed back down. And you're like, I'm just done. And if Jesus isn't just going to fix all this immediately, I can't wait anymore. It's dangerous to have hope. And so in the midst of this, Jesus says, do not fear, only believe, and she will be well. And so, trusting in Jesus, Jairus follows Jesus to where his daughter lay. And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except for Peter, John, and James. This is the first time we get a mention in Luke of kind of this inner three of Peter, John, and James. So he brings Peter, John, and James, and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her, but he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. See, Jesus shows up in Middle Eastern culture, particularly in Jesus' day and age. When somebody died, you had to bury the body quick because of the climate and the temperature, and so they would move fast. So by the time Jesus is showing up in this moment, the professional mourners are already there wailing and weeping. Families already gathering. The procession is already beginning because everybody knows that this girl is dead. And Jesus steps into this crowd and he says, "Don't weep, for she's not dead, but sleeping." And they all laugh at him. They're like, "No, we've seen her. She's not breathing. She's dead. She's not mostly dead. She's all the way dead." There's no denying this. And Luke is making sure that we understand this. That's why he's emphasizing this, because he wants us to know that she is dead. And Jesus says, no. She's not dead. She's sleeping. And so taking her by the hand, verse 54, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once, and he directed that something should be given her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. I mean, what an incredible moment. And again, as a dad of a daughter, I try and put myself in Jairus' position, thinking that my daughter is dead, and then now watching as Jesus raises her back to life, and just the awe and the whole flux of emotions that you would be going through in this moment. But again, we see that Jesus has power and authority over nature because he calmed the storm. He has power and authority over the demonic because he cast the demons out of the man in the Gerasenes. He has power and authority over sickness because he healed the woman of her ailment. And now he shows his power and authority over death, again, by raising this girl to life. And I love that Jesus, even in the way he directs them, you need to give her something to eat. What's he reminding all of us in this moment? That she's not some spirit, some ghost, some phantom. No, she needs to eat because she's a physical person that was dead and he's now brought back to life. And he's proving that to all who are gathered in this space. And her parents, elated, amazed. And what's his encouragement to them? Hey, let's keep this on the down low, right? Which seems strange because when we looked at last week's passage with the man who was freed of all the demons, Jesus is like, "Go back and tell everyone what the Lord's done for you. You go tell everybody." But now he's back on the other side of the lake where there's more of a Jewish population with a Jewish expectation of who the Messiah would be. And if Jesus, who's already raised someone from the dead, now raising more people from the dead, he's going to start to be positioned as this political figure. And he's saying, "I'm a different Messiah than any of you think I am. I'm much better than what you think I am. And I don't want to be exposed to something that I'm not. So let's just keep this quiet. Let's not create a commotion," even though he's already got the crowds all around him. He's got people following him every which way. But what we see in this moment, in both of these moments, intertwined and colliding, is that the despair of these two people is met by the King of Kings. Jairus continued to believe, even in the face of death, that Jesus was the answer. The woman who was bleeding placed her faith in Jesus, and both of them experienced life-altering events. Their faith rightly placed in Jesus. And it was by Jesus alone that restoration and healing were possible. In Christ alone, wholeness is possible. So as we read through this, the question becomes, where does this leave us? Or better yet, where do you find yourself in this story? Are you simply observing the actions of Jesus, applauding him from afar, curious, find him interesting, but you're still not quite ready to place your faith in him? Or are you with the disciples who have just left everything and like wherever Jesus goes, that's where I'm going to go? Or again, are you like Jairus and the woman who was bleeding? That you're just hanging on by a thread and you are desperate for healing. You are desperate for wholeness. You are desperate for Jesus to move in your life. Maybe for too long you've been observing in the crowd but not engaging with Jesus yourself. You've kind of been living vicariously through others, but it's time for you to lean in and actually have some conversations with him and declare for yourself who Jesus is in your life. Maybe for some of you, out of self-protection, it feels too dangerous to hope in Jesus because you've been disappointed by so many people in your life. And if Jesus disappoints you, then you don't know where that's going to leave you. And can I just say, I understand where you're coming from with that. Because disappointments that we've experienced in life, those are real things. Those are hard to forget. Those live with us. Those make us fearful. But when it comes to Jesus, my encouragement to you is don't hold back. Don't hold back from him. He's got real broad shoulders that can bear all your burdens. Place your faith in Jesus and allow him to meet you in your pain, to meet you in your sorrow, to meet you in your disappointment. C.S. Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity, he says, Christ says, give me all. I don't want so much of your time and so much of your money and so much of your work. I want you. I have not come to torment your natural self, but to kill it. No half measures are any good. Hand over the whole natural self, all the desires with which you think innocent as well as the ones you think wicked, the whole outfit, and I will give you a new self instead. In fact, I will give you myself. My own will shall become yours. If you're looking for wholeness in Christ, then give your whole self to Christ. I remember when Rachel was at her worst, and we were desperately pleading for God to heal her. But the healing wasn't coming. And in our desperation, we continued to turn towards God, and we ended up receiving something even greater in the midst of our pain. His presence. It was his sustaining presence that allowed us as a family to worship even when not all was as we wanted it to be. When not all was as we hoped it would be, when the pain was not lessening, when it was increasing. And when we handed over our whole selves, our fears, our faults, our failures over to him, we found wholeness in him, even in our desperation. It was in this desperation that God met us so that our prayer could become like that of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they faced the fiery furnace in Daniel 3. They would not bow down to King Nebuchadnezzar's idol. And so he said, I'm going to throw you into the fiery furnace. And they give to me one of the best encapsulations of faith. When they respond back to him and they say, you know what, our God, he could rescue us right here and now. He could overturn this whole situation. But if not, meaning even if we have to go into those flames, even if we're burned up in those flames, we will not praise another name. Why? Because God is still good. That realization of who he is and his presence is sustaining. That is a gift. And we experience a wholeness of God when we give our whole self to Jesus. Trusting that he is enough. Enough to overcome our pain. Enough to sustain us in our pain. Enough to give hope even when all seems impossible. He is the one who has the power over the seas. He can cast away the demonic. He can heal the sick. And he can raise the once dead. This is who he is. And just as an end cap, I didn't do this last service, but I need to practice what I preach. And I said, let's give testimony when we see God move. You guys, we're coming up on 5 years that we were able to I knew it was coming. 5 years where God provided a miraculous provision for a treatment for Rachel. And she has had health that we never imagined she would have. not without complications, but we have seen his provision in profound ways. And we can still both look each other in the eye and say, even if it all comes back, God is still good. So if it's wholeness that you seek, give your whole self to Jesus, and you will live. Pray with me. Father, you are good. And Lord, as I stand here, I know there are so many unanswered prayers in this room. So many wrestling, not knowing what you're doing, how you're moving. So many feeling as though you don't see them. Lord, would they know your presence? Would they know your goodness? Would they trust in you in the trials and in the joys? Father, we thank you for these examples of two people that came to you in dire situations. And you showed your ability, your power, your authority. God, and that same ability, power, and authority is yours today, yesterday, and forever. And so help us to come under that, to trust that, to lean into that, to taste and see that you are good. Jesus, we love you. And we pray all of this in your name. Amen. Amen. As we continue in worship this morning, I want to remind you that the communion table is available. And we come to the table as an act of remembrance of Jesus' death and resurrection, trusting that he has paid our debt in full. And as we take this time, I would encourage you, when you're ready, to partake of the communion elements, but to bring your whole self. Bring all your fears. Bring all your faults. Bring all your failures to him. Come to him and find rest for your weary soul. Take hold of him, not only finding healing in his wings, but finding refuge in him. So let's turn our attention towards his goodness. Let's give him praise. But I want to close this morning by reading from a psalm that I've turned to often in our study of Luke. And I've found myself coming back, and I've read this before with you, but I just keep coming back to it. In Psalm 63. O God, you are my God, and earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you, my flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water, so I have looked upon you in the sanctuary, beholding your power and glory, because your steadfast love is better than life. My lips will praise you. So I will bless you as long as I live. In your name I will lift my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with fat and rich food, and my mouth will praise you with joyful lips when I remember you upon my bed, and I meditate on you in the watches of the night. For you have been my help. And in the shadow of your wings, the shadow of your kanaf, I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you, and your right hand upholds me. May you earnestly, desperately seek Jesus this week. And may you trust that he is good. May you reach for him, take hold of him. And may you experience his grace and know the completeness and the wholeness of his peace. God bless you. We'll see you next week.